Welcome to Bifocal. This is part 2 of a series that we're doing labeled, How Did I Start My Business? In this particular series, I'm doing a 3-part series on how I started Concept, and this is part 2. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Part 2 of how I started Concept Services. In part 1, I mentioned to you that I never really did start the original company that I intended to start, and I ended up taking a job with a software development company, and the owner of that company was, his name was Larry. And so I went to work with Larry, and that was a pretty good job for me, and I liked it. And I knew it, I understood it, and it was a good deal for me. I liked Larry. We got along very well. I liked the people that I worked with. So that turned out at the time to seem like a pretty good deal. What ended up happening was about 9 months after I went to work with Larry, he ended up selling his company. And he sold it to a marketing advertising company out of Columbus, Ohio. And they were pretty much a traditional marketing advertising company. And they acquired Larry's company, and at the same time when they acquired Larry's company, they also acquired a direct mail, direct marketing group out of Cleveland. And their intent at the time was they were trying to put together this mega marketing advertising technology company that could provide pretty much any service in that marketing advertising space. And the idea was pretty progressive at the time. And for me, I was pretty excited about it. It seemed like it was going to be more opportunity for me, more services to sell. There were some services that I wasn't familiar with, marketing and advertising. I was looking forward to learning that business, as well as the direct mail, direct marketing group. I didn't know really anything about that. So I was kind of excited about it. So Larry, we went through several months through the acquisition, and Larry ended up selling, but Larry ended up staying on. He didn't leave. He ended up staying on. He ran his group and worked closely with the new group out of Columbus. And then about 3 months after the deal was done and Larry's group was officially acquired, Larry did eventually end up leaving. And he just was, he was done and ready to move on. And I had now probably been with the company for probably about a year. So this might have been right around 2001 now. And when Larry left, Doug, the owner of the marketing advertising company in Columbus, Doug approached me and he said, "Hey, with Larry gone, would you be interested in running this group?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd be very, very interested in running this group." And for me, I thought it was just going to be a great opportunity. And so we worked through that. And I think relatively pretty soon after that, they approached me again and asked if I would be willing to also manage the direct marketing group, the direct mail group out of Cleveland. And that one made me a little more nervous because I really didn't know much about that service. But I wasn't going to turn down the opportunity, and I said, yeah, I very much would be interested in that as well. And I think Doug was looking for somebody up this way because he was in Columbus. I think he was looking for somebody to have some eyes and ears on these two groups up here. And so it worked out well for both of us. So I had to get to know this group. I had to get familiar with everything about it. And so every week I would go up to the Cleveland group, and they worked out of this big building. It was an old building, and they had big printing presses in there and that type of thing. And well, way back in the furthest, remotest part of the building in the corner was a telemarketing group. And that was part of this direct marketing group. And it was made up of three employees, three females. And I didn't know anything about that group. And so every week that I'd go up, I'd work my way back and I would stand right outside their door. And I would just listen to them and just try to get a feel for, what are they talking about on the phone, and get a feel for how they sound on the phone. And the more I did that, the more I was actually impressed with their capabilities. So some time went by, and the more I got familiar with them and actually got to know them, I thought, there's more I can do with this group than telemarketing. And so I approached Doug with an idea, and I said, Doug, I got an idea I'd like to talk to you about for this group. I'd like to move them down to Akron with me. And he said, well, what are you thinking? And I said, well, they're actually pretty good on the phone. And there's a need in the market for lead generation, and I'd like to convert this telemarketing group into a sales lead generation service. And I'd like to start marketing lead generation as a service. I said, I think there's a big need in the market. And so we talked about that. Doug gave me the green light. They were a marketing group, so they started putting together some collateral for us and some things that we could hand out at the time. And so I ended up going back to Cleveland, met with these 3 individuals, shared with them our idea and what we were trying to do, and they were excited. They too thought, whoa, this is another opportunity for them personally. Shared with them that I wanted to bring them down to Akron. They were excited about that. So we brought them down to Akron, and they set up shop in Akron. And I started training them on how we were going to go about marketing this service and how this lead generation type call was going to be different than this telemarketing call. And so we went through a couple weeks just doing some training and that type of thing. And then we got all of our information together, all of our collateral together, and then we went out selling lead generation as a service. And sure enough, we got a fairly large local healthcare provider interested in us working for them. And they had an occupational therapy group, and they wanted us to work in their occupational therapy group. They wanted us to call into businesses and companies that had a high chance for accidents on the job. And the reason we were calling into those type of companies, because if there was an accident on the job, then there was probably a need for occupational therapy. And our job in working with them was to educate the market on their facility, and if they had employees that had a need for occupational therapy, they wanted to make them aware and wanted them to send those employees over. So we met with this healthcare provider, set out a strategy of how we were going to work, and defined the data and who we were going to call and what that call was going to be like. And the goal of the project was for us to schedule appointments for them. So we signed the deal. They were on board. I came back, met with this new group that we put together, walked them through the objective, walked them through exactly what this healthcare provider does, occupational therapy, how it was going to work, what the goal was of the call. We went through a call outline of what that call was going to look like and what their objective was on that call. Went through the positioning, everything. Eventually, we ended up going to work for this provider. Well, we got about 3 months into it, and it was going like gangbusters. We actually was doing very well, scheduling just a lot of appointments. And after about 3 or 4 months, the healthcare provider sat us down and said, hey, we're going to have to end. And I said, well, I don't understand. This is going very well. And they said, well, that's the problem. You guys are generating more activity than we can keep up with. And we appreciate it, but we just can't keep up with the activity. And so they wanted to take a break. Well, when that happened, I knew at that time that there was a business here. I knew there was a business. I went home, I started talking to my wife, Val, about this and said, I think that's a business that I can do. I understand it. I get it. These guys had a need for it. We were generating leads. I know that I can do that business. And so I continued working with Doug and his group, but in the evenings I'd go home and I would work on business plans. And how could I do this? And what would be involved for me to start this business? And the business plans really were more Excel spreadsheets of what-if scenarios, if you will. And I would go through these what-if scenarios, and the what-ifs were, well, what if I had one employee? And what if I could keep them billable 100% of the time? And what if I could bill them out at this rate? What would that look like? What would my expenses be? And then I would say, well, what if I could have two BDRs? That's what we called them back then, BDRs, business development reps. Well, what if I had two BDRs? And what if one was 100% billable and one was 50, but I could bill them out at $35 an hour? What if I could bill them out at $40 an hour? What would that look like? And I just had scenario after scenario, and every night I'd come home and I'd work on those, and did that for weeks. And continued selling it while I was working for Doug, and that was going well, and it just kept fueling my fire even more and more. And all I would do is talk Val's ear off about, I think I can do this. This makes sense to me. And I remember, it had been weeks, and we went out to dinner with her parents. And after dinner, we got in the car, and I'm just talking her ear off. I mean, Val was a trooper through this, because I know I was just talking her ear off every time I had a moment. I was talking about this business. It had a grip on me. And we got out of dinner and got in the car, and we're driving home, and she said, and I'm yipping. And she says, Dan, tell me again, what is your idea? Walk me through again exactly what you want to do. And I said, well, Val, here's what I want to do. I want to start a company that does lead generation for other companies. And I said, the reason I think there's something there, the reason I think it can be successful is that companies are not good at that part of the sales process. I'm not that good at that part of the sales part. I don't like that part. And there's companies out there that don't like it. We're doing work at my company right now, and the customers that we're working with, they love it. That's what I want to do. I want to do the front end part of the sales process. I want to generate sales appointments and sales leads. And Val, she stopped and she went, interesting concept. And I remember I looked at her and I said, Val, that's it. She said, what? I said, that's the name of the company. I start this company, I'm going to call it Concept Services. I'm going to sell the concept. The concept was that you had to separate new business development from any other part of your sales process. That was the concept. You can't have your sales reps also do the prospecting. It requires two different skill sets. It's two different people. Just because you're good on the phone doesn't mean that you're good in front of the customer. Just because you're good in front of the customer and good in that face-to-face, it doesn't mean you're good on the phone. It's different skill sets. That's the concept. I'm going to sell that. Man, and so Val was instrumental in coming up with what we obviously ended up moving forward with. That was the name of the company. So time's going on, and every night we'd go to bed, and I had these spreadsheets, and there was probably 10 of them, and I had them underneath my bed. And every night we'd get in bed, and she'd lean over and grab a book, and I'd lean over and grab my spreadsheets. And she's laying in bed reading her book, and I'm laying in bed reading my spreadsheets. And every night, and I am not exaggerating, every night I would say, Val, look at this. If I can do this, look what this would look like. I think we can do it. Whoa, what if I can do this, then what? But boy, if I can't do this, then this could be a little bit tough. And I would do that every night. One night, we go to bed. She once again reaches for her book. I once again reach for my spreadsheets, and we're both doing what we do. And I am once again just yipping and bending her ear about this and that. And eventually she ends up putting her marker in her book, closes her book up, leans it over on the side of her bed, rolls over, leans up, reaches up, turns the night light off, rolls over and says, Dan, just do it. Now, I'm still laying in bed. The lights are off, and I still got my arms up in the air, still holding my spreadsheet. And she says, Dan, just do it. And when she said that, that hit me. I knew I had her support, and I knew I needed her support. And Val was just instrumental in every aspect of starting this business, and you'll hear more about it as we go. But she was instrumental and came up with the name Concept Services, made it clear to me that she would support me. And so I went to bed that night, did not sleep. I mean, I was excited. I was going to do it. This was it. I'm moving forward. And so I went to work the next day, and I remember I called Doug because he was in Columbus and I was in Akron, and I called him and said, hey, Doug, I need to schedule some time. When you're going to come up, or I'd like to schedule some time to come down. And so we scheduled a time to meet, and I met with him, and I said, hey, I'm going to go start my own business. Well, Doug knew that was eventually, or that was ultimately how I arrived there with Larry. He knew that I was trying to start my own business, but decided not to, and ended up taking a job with Larry. So he knew that was part of my past. And he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm actually going to go start a lead generation business and do what I kind of started here. And he kind of looked at me kind of funny at first, like, well, I don't know how that's going to work. We're going to compete together. And so we talked about it, and I said, well, Doug, I think if we structure this correctly, this could be a win-win for both of us. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't have any money. I can't hire any employees, but I can sell. But I don't have anybody to do the work. I said, would you be open to me contracting my work back to you? And he said, well, how do you think that's going to work? And I said, well, here's how I would see it. I'll sell it. I'll do all the paperwork and sew the deal up. And then I'll meet with the customer, identify exactly what we're going to do, set the strategy and the objectives, and handle all the data side of it. And then when we get ready to call, I'll manage the project, and I'll come in and meet with your staff and explain to them the objective of the call, the industry, the customer, everything we got to identify on this call. And I'll end up coming in periodically every week, meet with them. I'll manage it. I need your staff to make the calls. And Doug said, hey, I'm open to that. And I said, well, Doug, I think this could be a win-win. And so we ended up negotiating a rate that was acceptable for both of us, because Doug wasn't going to do it for free. And so I ended up going through a business model. And keep in mind, this business model that I put together, it was all predicated. I had one goal, one objective in mind when I put this together. My number one objective at the time, believe it or not, my number one objective when I started this business was I wanted to be able to make at least the same amount of money I was making while working for somebody. That was my goal. I didn't want to start a business and make less money. And I didn't have this grandiose idea that I was going to become this millionaire. I just thought, man, if I can be my own boss, have my own company, and make what I'm making, to me, that was a pretty good deal. That was a good deal for me. And so the business plan that I put together, I thought I could do that. So when I had to negotiate this rate with Doug, I had to make sure the rate that he was going to charge me, that I was comfortable that I could mark that up and still make enough money. And so that's what we decided to do. Doug was on board with me. I remember I left. They designed my logo for me, my very first logo, and they were very good. They were very good. They were good people, and we had a good relationship. And sure enough, the first couple projects, I ended up contracting back to Doug. I opened up shop down my basement. So this is where we're going to end part 2. In part 3, we're going to talk about what did that look like starting a business down my basement, and what were the series of events that started to transpire at that time. For me, that was when everything just took off. The journey that I went down after that, I'll never forget that. And I'm going to share that with you, and I think you're going to find it interesting. So, hey, thanks for tuning in on part 2. Part 3 is coming. Stay tuned.